Hello and welcome to our Bible study for today. We are in Psalm 140 and our free PDF is available on our website at tobelikechrist.com. There's a link in the description. If you haven't already, check out the new podcast that we've started. Those episodes are rolling out chapter by chapter and they give us a little longer period of time to discuss events of each chapter rather than just the 5 minutes that we have in these really concise studies. We started back in Genesis. And so if you're interested in those, go check them out. For those of you who have already gone all the way through Genesis, all the way up through Psalms and are up to date on these studies, maybe those don't interest you, but I think there's a lot of people who are starting Bible studies this year that may be looking for something like that. So if that's your thing, there's also links in the description to those. Psalm 140 is a psalm of David, and I think it's really similar to some of the psalms that we read previous. It's kind of refreshing to go back to some of the themes that David often talks about now that we've been out of them for a while. We do actually have a New Testament reference to some of the wording that appears in Psalm 140, and that's in the second half of Romans chapter 3 and verse 13. For themes today, this psalm is pretty straightforward in its subject matter. The one theme I have, David prays for protection and for the wicked schemes of sinful men to fail. We have an old friend today in the definitions section. We have the word Selah, which we have not seen in a minute. It's getting lonely. Thought we neglected it, but we have found it again in Psalm 140. So let's very briefly talk about this term and what it means, or at least the latest thoughts on what it means. So Selah appears in verse 3. It appears over 70 times in the psalm. Scholars have tried for years to discover the true meaning of the word, but it remains somewhat of a mystery. Some scholars think that it's a musical pause or a literary pause, calling for the reader to stop and to meditate and to think on what was just read or sung. Other scholars propose its meaning that its meaning relates to worship. It's an expression of praise to God of some kind. Still others suggest it's a literary device that's used by the ancients to mark themes that run through the text. The only other book of the Bible that has this word in it is the book of Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk. And then we have another word in verse 3 that we want to talk about, and that's the word asp, A-S-P. And this just refers to a venomous snake. And from what I was reading, this can refer to a number of different species of snakes. To look at all of Psalm 140, we've got to look at 13 verses. I think they all pretty much have the same overarching theme. And so I've got them under one heading entitled, Don't Let the Wicked Succeed, verses 1 through 13. David's prayer in Psalm 140, or what he's writing about, he's asking God to preserve him from wicked men who were planning all kinds of evil against him and against the people around him. These men were deplorable, as you'll see if you read the psalm and the way that they're described and the adjectives that David uses to describe them. David describes them as having sharp tongues and venom in their mouths, like those asps or those poisonous snakes. David's path was strewn with traps and snares and hidden nets that were all designed to trip him up, and all those traps had been laid by these evil people. In the face of these arrogant and violent men, David put his faith in the Lord. He asked the Lord to be a covering for his head in the battles that he would face in the future, and he asked the Lord to cause the schemes of these evil people to backfire and to fall back on their heads like burning coals. Rather than these evil men succeeding at hunting down the innocent, David prayed that the violence that they intended to inflict on others would find them and dispose of them. David's final statement in this psalm, which I want to read for you, was a statement of confidence in the Lord's future protection. He writes, I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and will execute justice for the needy. Surely the righteous shall give thanks to your name. The upright shall dwell in your presence. So that is Psalm 140. Let's talk about an application, maybe a not so popular application today, but one I think that is worth pointing out. It's about politicians, and I will be the first to say I don't always have the greatest respect for politicians for who they are personally, but David was, in a sense, a politician. He was a king. David was the king of Judah and Israel. And I want you to put yourself in their shoes for a second. Can you imagine how hard it must be to be a king, a senator, or a prime minister, a prince, or some other kind of important political or just an important leader in general? I know that we can spend a lot of time sitting around criticizing those in power, but do we ever take a moment to consider the temptations that they face and the challenges that they have in their spiritual battle? They are constantly interacting with people who are setting traps for them and laying down hidden snares to catch them and some way. They're surrounded by two-faced people who are always working some angle for their own self-interests. Their work colleagues are often some of the most arrogant and perhaps some of the most violent people in the whole earth. They have fake friends and they have bitter enemies that are close to them every single day. Their lives are, I would argue, probably trickier than ours. I can generally avoid being surrounded by fake people all the time, or people who are trying to trip me up. People lay less snares for me because I'm not that important and they're less incentivized to do it. Putting ourselves in the shoes of some of these leaders and reading a psalm that's written by a leader, a political leader, if you want to think about it that way, we can see more clearly why we need to pray for our rulers, as we're instructed to do in 1 Timothy chapter 2, 1 and 2. Yes, their lives certainly come with privileges that I don't have, but they also have temptations that I don't have. So let's not neglect to pray for our leaders as the Lord instructs us to do.